education is another big factor. Like that how to work. So in all management courses in top-rated universities or whatever, I don't think, I might be wrong, but there's nowhere where it's taught how to manage a blended workforce. How do you manage a team of full-time employees, contractors, independent workers, interns? How do you put them all together into one cohesive team? I'm not sure that's taught anywhere in any curriculum, in any MBA program. So I think the next generation of managers, and especially middle managers, will need to come through some kind of formal education with that.
My guest on today's episode of The In Factor is Akhil Seth. Akhil received his Master's of Engineering Science from the University of Oxford, where he captained the rowing team, led a sponsorship team for the Oxford Business Review, and rocked the freelance math tutoring scene. Akhil is currently the head of the Open Talent Center of Excellence at UST, an IT services and consulting company. In this role, he's on a mission to revolutionize the gig economy by delivering lightning-fast and cost-effective talent solutions for freelancers. He's an open talent enthusiast with a passion for redesigning work. Listen into our conversation as we explore Akhil's insights on the impact and role of technology freelance work in companies of all types and sizes. Akhil, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I met you through some mutual contacts that as I started to explore this what I was calling the gig economy, but I think I'm going to start calling it the fractional economy or the freelance economy, because I think that's probably a better definition of what's going on today. But I'm really excited to learn more about what you're doing. And I know you've got a background in mathematics. I think you were a tutor and did some things, in that space. But now you're working as head of the Open Talent Center of Excellence. So tell us a little bit about what that means and kind of how you got to this.
Sure, I'd love to. So starting with what the Open Talent Center of Excellence is, it's just at UST, which is where I work, we try to bring in we try to engage as many forms of talent as possible to get our work done. There are many ways and engagement models between employer and quote unquote employee. And open talent, freelance, gig, all mean the same thing. It's just one of them. So what we've been building out is the ability to bring freelancers, gig workers, and open talent professionals into UST and have them do UST work. Then answering the other, I mean, that's a simple one sentence explanation. But as for how I got here, I think super candidly, completely by accident. Like I don't think any student or even any young professional dreams of being in the human resources talent planning sphere when they grow up. I didn't even know that sphere existed until I started this job. But it was my boss actually is very charismatic man called Vinod Karta, and we worked together previously at an internship that I did, and we just clicked. So this is where, and he said, when you graduate, come work with me. I'll give you a real problem and you can just solve it however you want. So he kind of gave me a bit of a blank canvas to do what I wanted within reason, to build out UST's Open Talent Center of Excellence.
So did USC already have the title of this center and the concept in mind, or did you bring all that to the table? I mean, what were you handed when they gave you this project?
That's a good question. So yeah, it wasn't a complete blank canvas. There was a sketch drawing of what this was going to look like. And the center of excellence, like, we'd already decided, sorry, my boss and his peers had already decided that there was to be a center of excellence in place. And so they'd put together an organizational structure, but that's evolved a lot from when it was initially designed. And so it's now, so what was handed to me was, truthfully, access to some of the sharpest minds in the open talent space. We work with Open Assembly very closely, who are experts in this field, and they're helping us build out our open talent program. So that's a huge resource that that I was given access to, and then just the power and influence that my boss had within the company. Like and even today, at the beginning, sorry, even today, but especially at the beginning, the influence and the change making that's required to make this work, that started out from his credibility that he'd built out. So those were the two things that I had access to and was given when I started.
What do you think led to this project? I mean, why did they decide that this was a high priority and important enough to hire someone like you to run this and build this?
That's a really good question. So simply, I mean, it all gets tied back to profit at the end of the day. So we make the UST's business model is basically that we create and build teams that we can then deploy to client sites to get client work done. So we have a lot of avenues through which we gather teams. So we have external hiring. We have our own. We're about 30,000 people now, like full-time employees. And so this was really just meant to be another string to our bow. That was the thinking at the time. And it also came with a lot of, it was quite innovative. Very few of our competitors have done this successfully for their clients. And few of our clients have done this successfully for themselves. So this was, if we could crack this would be a 1 billion person economy and market that that neither us nor our competitors nor our clients really knew how to leverage. So the size of the opportunity was huge, and the return on investment would be enormous.
So when was it? When did you first get hired to launch this?
So I actually was onboarded about 3 months after the launch of the open talent strategy, and so this was about 2 years ago.
Okay. So, did the all the environmental changes, the pandemic, and the change in the remote workforce, and did all of that factor into it, or was this something that had been in the works for quite a while?
It's yeah, no, you know it. It was. I think even if the pandemic definitely helped, right? All these factors really accelerated the acceptance and adoption of the freelance marketplace. But I think, truthfully, if I remember correctly, this was in the roadmap even before the pandemic started. So the pandemic just made us more sure that we needed to do something like this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really fascinating. I think when you look at, I think a lot of these trends were already set in motion, but maybe we didn't all believe until we
Yeah,
experienced it ourselves. And, suddenly, everyone knew how to use some of these, these online communication systems, and there were people using them, before the pandemic. But in academics, for example, we learned we had been working with online education for more than a decade, but all of a sudden we were all teaching online. So it really changed
yeah.
things a lot. So tell me a little bit about your experience with building out this program, because it's interesting. You're in a space that I want to talk about today, this fractional or freelance economy space, but you also are what we call an intrapreneur. You're building an entrepreneurial or new project within an organization. So tell us what that's been like. What have you learned from that?
It's funny you asked that. I was just reflecting precisely on a slight mindset shift that I've had quite recently. Remember at the start, I was frustrated by all the bureaucracy and uh, all the inertia that you had to overcome to get anything changed at a big company like UST. But I've recently come to the realization that it's important that that be there. Like, it could be very destructive if I could come in and in 1 week change everything about UST. A company this size that's growing like 20% every year needs to be doing 90% of the same things year on year. So that mindset shift has it's made. I think what it's done is it's helped the whole team accept that we need to meet our end customers, which are the hiring managers at the end of the day. We need to meet them almost precisely where they are. Like the narrative of, if you come here, if you change your practices in this way, then you will receive like great value. That narrative doesn't work as well as we thought it would.
So that's very interesting, because like you, as someone who's built programs and been somewhat entrepreneurial within a bureaucracy, it has been frustrating, and it continues to be frustrating. On the other hand, the structure and the resources provided are what makes it possible sometimes to do what you need to do. And I see you nodding, and
Exactly.
I think that's a realization that you come to. So you kind of have to be what I call a boundary spanner, have 1 foot in each world, or one half of your brain on each side,
Yeah.
because if you're not pushing that innovation envelope, you're not meeting the goal of what they're trying to have accomplished. But at the same time, if you aren't able to do it within the structure and systems, it's going to fail. So it's kind of like working with an investor. They're always there, and you've got to you've got to work with them on that. So let's talk a little bit. I'm very curious about what you're learning through this process, about this whole space.
Okay.
Because there are, I'm sure, a lot of landmines that companies have to try to avoid, as they're trying to build out their workforce. Role definition, right?
Mm.
Job definition. Is this person actually an independent contractor, or are they a work for hire? And I assume there's a lot of issues there. So what kinds of things do you do to help your clients kind of move into this space today?
Damn, you got some really good questions. The I say there are two main aspects to bringing a client along. One is just the usual sets of compliance and security things that they're not going to budge on. They're not going to say we're okay with a worker that doesn't have insurance, or this person, it's okay if they work on their personal laptop. Those are some of the things that we've building out the infrastructure that allows for the freelance economy to come into enterprise is a really big, well, it's the biggest enabler. So, like a security solution for freelancers um, to work in enterprise environments, along with all the business and compliance regulatory structures that individual governing bodies, like in individual states, in individual countries, differ vastly. All of those minute details need to be taken care of before a client will even come to the table and listen to the idea of having a freelancer come on board. And then after that, it's really just about the experience, which I know has always been we've been able to knock out the park. The experience part has been super easy, that value proposition. And what I mean by that is, how quickly can this person be hired? How relevant are they to the skills that the client wants? These are things we can very quickly demonstrate are hypercharged when you're sourcing through the open talent ecosystems. And so the activation energy is pretty high to bring a client along into engaging with you on freelance marketplaces. But once they cross that threshold, it really does open a lot of floodgates.
So, what kinds of skills are companies looking for, that mostly that you're working with?
So the ones that we're working with are mostly with tech skills. So, full stack developers, AI, machine learning experts, cybersecurity, those sorts of things.
So, what about issues? You brought up issues of security, and I know I had someone on my podcast some time ago who actually was creating a company to place FANG engineers into other kinds of jobs. So I'm an engineer that works at one of the Netflix or Amazon or Facebook or one of those companies, and somebody else is hiring me. Is that a security issue? Because I'm working at two companies. You mentioned your own private laptop versus a laptop provided, I guess, by the company. And so do companies, how do companies feel about that? If you're working for multiple companies at one time?
The general consensus is they don't like it.
They don't like it.
As you can imagine.
But yeah, you have to be independent, right? Which means that
Right.
you can't be a work for hire, which means that you can't take, that, you're independent in the way that you work and you think, and you're not taking all of your guidance from the company, right?
Right. So it's a difficult, and all companies that we work with exist on a spectrum with regards to that particular issue. Like at the most lenient end, they're just like, they tell us, we don't actually care who you get to bring on. You take care of that. Just give us the end work product. And there are other companies that want to scrutinize every single hour that one of our resources works on their product. So, as for what a client wants, it can vary. It can vary quite vastly. As for what UST wants as well, we also really don't like it when uh, a resource that we're working with is working with one of our competitors or one of our clients' competitors, or even anyone at that. We'd love for them to be working solely with us. And I'm sure every enterprise, if they had their way, their employees would have no other distractions outside, or no other work distractions outside of their occupation with them. And that's still very much the mindset that the individuals working with the resource have. So even like we have to spend a bit of time educating the managers themselves that these people, they're not employees of UST. You can't treat them. You can't expect them to work the weekends without any pay, or you can't just call them at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and expect them to spontaneously join a call. There's a lot of education about how to manage these resources, and I think that's really the biggest point. It's the management piece rather than any like distraction. Like managers at UST are used to having complete control's the wrong word, but they're ease of direction over every resource that they're responsible for.
Yeah, it is a really it's a really difficult nut to crack as you talk about it, because companies, of course, companies are struggling, I think, with managing remote workforces, period. And then we're talking about adding on this layer of independent contractors. But I'm guessing that the only way you can get certain kinds of talent these days is by entering into this space. I mean, it's hard to get. Would that be a true statement?
Absolutely, yeah. No, we've seen cases where we've been working, we've been working to fill roles for months without any success, and then we find that this kind of person, this unicorn that the manager's looking for, exists as an independent contractor on open talent marketplace. So, yeah, you're exactly right. Like, without embracing this idea, the talent doesn't exist.
Yeah. And therein lies, I'm sure, a lot of the motive for UST to go down this route, right? Because that's what
Yes.
you've got to do. That's what you've got to do. So, so I study, as you know, we've talked earlier, entrepreneurial mindset and the way that people work and think. And I'm curious, with the folks that you're working with, do you see them as having an entrepreneurial mindset, not the corporations necessarily, but the workers themselves? Do you are they thinking like entrepreneurs, or are they thinking just maybe more about, I can make money and have some flexibility and not have to be tied to one company? And or is there even maybe they're all different, so different that you can't really classify?
I guess, yeah, the answer is as unhelpful as you can imagine it is. They are all completely different. I'm trying to think what entrepreneurial traits I've seen in some of the examples that I've been a bit closer to. I think obviously the fact that I think the big difference, I'd say, between open talent resources versus full-time employees is that all open talent resources have to know how to sell, which a lot of our employees, they only have to do once every 2 or 3 years or 5 years when they're switching jobs, whereas an open talent resource has to do that pretty much every day to earn new business. So that's a skill which is transferable that I think they exhibit a lot more acutely than that's an entrepreneurial skill, I'd say, that they exhibit a lot more acutely than a counterpart in a full-time job would.
So, so when you think about these independent contractors that you work with, do you see, what kinds of challenges do you see or hear about them facing? I mean, not everybody can sell, and especially when you're talking about somebody in tech, sometimes they're that's not their forte. Not everyone, but that might be an area where that the human connection, is not as high a priority sometimes as the connection to technology. So what are some of the challenges that you see for these workers?
So looking at the data, you can easily see that the Pareto distribution, the 80-20 rule, there's that very much applies to the freelance space, if not more disproportionately. Like, I'm sure if on most talent marketplaces, you'll see that there's a very, I'm just iterating the point, but there's a very small handful of open talent professionals who are winning the majority of the business across all the demand, across all the enterprise. So that's the barrier to entry is very difficult as a new freelancer trying to make your way on a new marketplace. Other than that, I'd say the main challenges are, I've heard not horror stories, but unfortunate stories of, freelancers doing the work and then just not getting paid. They're always feeling like an outsider. I feel like I'm sure the human aspect of working in a team is lost with a lot of freelancers. And often to win business, they will have to do a lot of work upfront before their first paycheck. So like the pre-sales period for a freelancer can often be prohibitively long.
Mm-hmm. A lot like an entrepreneur or a startup, really. You've got to,
Right.
it's interesting because I think you're talking about building a product, which is you basically, and your brand, and being able to withstand the slow, the starvation time of the early years, right? Or the hopefully not years, but of the early months. Let's hope, and I guess you mentioned earlier that most of these freelancers have to have all their own insurance, right? They have to be, they have to provide a lot of things that a corporate environment typically provides.
That's right. Yeah. And they have to do that before they have any business.
Yeah. So they're taking a risk, which is another entrepreneurial, aspect of entrepreneurship, really.
Yeah.
And but one of the things that's reducing the risk is projects like yours, and also some of the other companies out there that provide platforms for people who want to work in jobs. So, for somebody who's interested in this space, what are some of the places they need to look? How do you get started in something like this?
You mean, how do you get started as a freelance worker?
Yeah, as a freelance worker.
Yeah, no, it's another good question. I haven't spent as much time as I would like thinking about that, because I've mostly been focused on how can we get these people who are ready to work actually deployed somewhere in UST or to a client account. But if I'm thinking just off the cuff, like what I would, as an enterprise user of a freelance service, what I would want to see is basically, can you handle a client? Communication, I think, is uh, the biggest sales device. And I've often found that building up, having references and having a solid reputation that you can inherit from whatever previously you've been working on is paramount to even getting yourself considered. So I guess the answer is already be brilliant and have enough evidence to showcase that, to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's you got to get that first gig, I guess we could call it, and try to get some references and demonstrate that you can provide value, right? I mean, which is what you do as an entrepreneur. So, as we talk, it sounds like there are more and more aspects of that. Now, from a company perspective, are most of your clients bigger corporations, or do you work with?
Yeah.
So bigger corporations are getting into this space, and so I'm curious, how are they? How does a company start to think about this? I mean, where do they look, and how do they get started?
Uh, to get These questions are so good. I'd say to get started, I think for every company, like, the freelance marketplace is going to solve a different purpose. And we've especially found that when we've been pitching open talent to some of our clients as well, what's the problem that they need solving? Open talent addresses them and can address them in very different ways. And so I think the first thing is to have a very good understanding of what problem you're trying to solve with open talent. With open talent as the solution. Like, the danger is, like, you see a hammer and you have a hammer that is open talent and you just go looking for nails to hit. But and then, like, once you've, like, clearly identified the problem, that there are niche open talent marketplaces and open talent infrastructure that you need to build out specifically for those use cases. Like, for example, if, like us, you're heavily dependent on tech workers, you need a roster of open talent marketplaces that have technology talent. And you also need to build in some way of the insurance that you should accept that the freelancer doesn't have. You need to build that in somehow into your model. And what we like, one of the things that we pitch a lot is our security solution. Like, how are you going to get these freelancers into your environment? Do you want to be shipping laptops halfway around the world every time you want to hire a freelancer, say in Jakarta? Hopefully not. So we've developed a VDI solution that is secure, lightweight, and can scale up and down within like 24 hours of our needs. So there are a lot of these enabling enablement criteria that need fixing once you've identified precisely which problem you want addressed, and then it becomes a question of slowly opening the tap and helping your organization with the change management and the cultural stuff that allows for open talent to propagate.
That's really interesting, I think, and there's so many things I think that I hadn't thought about, that so many factors, so many issues that you would have to consider, and it's not an easy thing to just decide we're going to move into this space, right? And getting the right people. I mean, hiring anyone, we always. My experience has been I'm always very excited to hire somebody to fill in a space, but then I realize there's training involved and there's onboarding and it usually takes a lot more of my time, at least initially, and to get somebody up to speed. It kind of makes me wonder about this whole area of training. So, as an educator, I work with students, and, in the past, students go to work for companies and they get a lot of their training initially from their companies. So, what does a freelancer do if they're coming right out of school and they decide, well, this is the path I want to do? They've got what they learned at university, but I'm an educator and I realize that there's still a lot to learn. We don't teach it all. So how does that work? How does onboarding work, and really even training that might be needed?
Yeah, fantastic question. Again, like it's the training and onboarding. I'd say there are two aspects to it, right? The cultural and the technical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the cultural one is we there's always more we can do there, and we probably don't spend enough time acclimating freelancers to how to work well in UST. Like, we do have our own culture and our own quirks, and it's taken me. I'm still learning what they are, like what the best ways of getting work done at UST is. But the technical ones, they're a bit easier, with, especially if we're onboarding a freelancer to a client account. Our clients tend to have a very specific set of technologies, sometimes archaic ones, that there are very structured training courses for bringing people up to speed. So with a freelancer, we have a lower threshold for how much time we can expend in having them train. But there's still a lot of sympathy there for understanding client specific technologies, and that's fairly easy to handle.
But the culture side is the tougher one. Yeah.
Exactly.
It takes a long time, and that's a really interesting thing. And what's fascinating about it is, not being acclimated to the culture can be really problematic to getting work done, right, in organizations, because we aren't in, even though you're an independent contractor, you're working typically with a team or with other people to accomplish things. So
Exactly.
that's really interesting. So I'm really curious. There's a lot going on right now. We've got everybody's excited about AI. A lot of changes there. A lot going on in the crypto space, and in a lot of opportunities in technology, and this trend with for freelance work. And So I'm just really curious. The government wants to get involved in a lot of this and regulate. And you're out in California. Are you in California? I
I
think.
am, yes.
Yeah. So California is kind of ground zero, I think, for legislation, at least in the freelance space or the gig space.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious. Do you have any insights on what's happening there and what's needed? What would be helpful and what's kind of getting in the way?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's just recognizing that freelancing is a very valid way of getting work done. So, yeah, as you alluded, in California, there was a real clampdown on being able to classify anyone as an independent contractor because that comes with tax benefits and potential uh, employment malpractices.
Yeah, tax benefits to the companies, right?
Tax benefits, yeah, to the company.
Which right, which legislation was going to take away, right? Or some of.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And benefits for the workers as well that
Yes.
they don't get as independent contractors. So I think understanding that, uh, and I think the big problem actually is in a conflation, comes in the conflation between uh, work and law. So what I mean by that is there seems to be quite an artificial boundary in between independent contracting and full-time employment. But when you really drill down to it and understand where the origins of those two things came from, it's just a risk versus reward factor. In independent contractors, there's a higher risk. You can get laid off anytime you want, but you typically get paid more. And you have certain tax benefits because you're your own company. You can expense a bunch of things. Whereas as a full-time employee, you get a fixed salary, you get loads of benefits. It's a lower risk but lower reward for the same work. Unfortunately, and that's really it. It's risk versus reward. That's where the boundary lies, in my opinion. I think what's going wrong is that governments are conflating the ways in which work gets done between the ways in which people should be able to pick their risk versus reward appetite. And it's a very artificial boundary, and that doesn't belong there. It's not a natural way to classify independent contracting versus fixed full-time employment. And until there's a way to separate the law from work, the way that work gets done, I don't really see an easy way for any company to navigate that political environment.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really great way, I think, to classify it. Think about the risk reward, which is, that's why entrepreneurship, for example, has worked. People take high risk and they expect a high reward, and sometimes they don't always get it. Obviously, that's the risk that they're taking, and so it's really it changes the whole dynamic when something comes in to modify that. But it's really fascinating too. I think I'm not in the HR space, but legislation and the laws around HR are, you have to practically, I mean, many people have law degrees now that work in that space because it's such a complicated space, and legislation is playing a big role. And I think there's just so much going on. It's actually fascinating, I think, to look at all of this and think about what the laws, and what the legal environment is going to be, and the political environment around all these new technologies, including freelance work, AI,
Yeah.
crypto. It's just a fascinating time right now.
Oh, definitely. And no doubt the law will be 10 years behind. Uh,
Always. Always. And it's going to be a challenging part, I think, to navigate, and having companies like you that are experts in that space to help companies, I'm sure, could be really, really helpful. Experts not just in that space, but in all space, everything around hiring these freelance workers. So are there in your mind, are there any overarching issues that that we need to be thinking about with respect to project-based work in the future. I mean, everything I see, it looks like it's going to be growing, and we're going to be seeing more of that. And I think there's probably a lot of entrepreneurial opportunity in this space to solve some of the problems that are out there. So I'm just curious if you have any top uh, goals or ideas in your mind of things that need to be addressed in that space.
Gosh, where to start? The biggest complication in my mind is the law. So if you're an entrepreneur and you have a good way of figuring out, if you can figure out a way to completely obfuscate the um, the complexities of the law from enterprise. So if there's a way that you can handle all of the compliance issues that involve bringing a freelancer to an enterprise company, then that's $1 billion company, and I would love to invest in it. Um, Aside from that, I'd say education is another big factor. Like that how to work. So in all management courses in top-rated universities or whatever, I don't think, I might be wrong, but there's nowhere where it's taught how to manage a blended workforce. How do you manage a team of full-time employees, contractors, independent workers, interns? How do you put them all together into one cohesive team? I'm not sure that's taught anywhere in any curriculum in any MBA program. So I think the next generation of managers, and especially middle managers, will need to come through some kind of formal education with that.
That's great. That's really insightful, I think. Really insightful, and I think it's a challenge. I mean, it's not just. I mean, it's not just with this the kind of worker that we're talking about today. Fractional work. It's really all remote workforces. I think figuring out how to navigate the workforce of the future. A lot of the management theory just doesn't fit anymore, and I think that's really insightful. So this has been really interesting, Akhil. I'm fascinated by what you do, and I could just talk more. And maybe we'll have you back on here later as things evolve, because this space is really, I think, evolving and changing. And I'm fascinated by what you're doing, and I think you're early in your career, and I just think it's just wonderful for you that you're in this space, because I'm sure you're learning a lot every day, and I've learned a lot just having this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I appreciate your questions as well. They've really made me think.
Oh, good. Good. Well, let me ask you one last question before I let you go. If you had, and this is the one most people hate, but if you have one piece of advice for someone that is thinking about, and you can go either way, thinking about entering the fractional workspace, either as a worker or as a corporation, what would that advice be?
Start by building out your network of trusted clients. Start small, and once you have evidence of your brilliance, uh, it'll be much easier for you to market yourself on a big platform.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's fascinating. It's really not different advice in a lot of ways than anybody starting out, but I think it's really, really critical and important for what we're talking about today. So that's great advice. How can our audience connect with you or find out more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. Please follow me on LinkedIn. Shall I? Akhil Seth. I'm the good-looking one. Happy to drop a link somewhere if that makes sense. But love to
Thank
connect
you.
with anyone interested.
Wonderful. And it's been such a delight, and I'm really excited to follow what you're doing and continue to see how you're building out this exciting open talent center of excellence. So thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to continuing to be in touch with you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Really appreciate this.
If you enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more about entrepreneurship, we would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of InFactor.